Oh, Facebook.
On Facebook, yeah. So welcome everyone to the New York Buddha Dharma Center. And my name is John Baker, for the record and for the recording. And let's see, the topic for tonight is Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche, Padmasambhava for our time. Rochelle, are you going to stand for the whole time? That's all I can, because we have this recording happening here.
Yes, I know that, just in case you need it back.
Okay. This hardy group, we'll see what happens with this. The idea for this center was to create a Dharma center that was really devoted to carrying on the lineage and teachings of Chögyam Trungpa, but also in the spirit in which he was raised, which is the Rimé spirit. It's called Rimé in Tibetan. And Rimé means ecumenical. It was actually started by the previous incarnation of that man up there on the top, among others. That's Dingdo Chensei Rinpoche, and his previous incarnation, Jamyang Kensei Rinpoche, was one of the founders of the Rimé movement. And so in the spirit of the Rimé movement, which Kensei Rinpoche and others embodied, we would like to invite a lot of other teachers that we find congenial to come and teach us. People like Pomlo Rinpoche, who we hope will come and has expressed a desire to come and teach, and others. At the Westchester Buddhist Center, we've had quite a few other teachers, both Tibetan and Western, including, I'm trying to think of the Western Zen teacher, senior moment. We've had people like Tsokni Rinpoche come and teach, Khandro Rinpoche, one of the few female teachers, and Pakchak Rinpoche has come and actually is working with some of our students very closely. And we've also had a number of Western guests. Reggie Ray has come. Some of you may know him. He has a center down in Crestone. And he's a student of Trungpa Rinpoche who's has his own Sangha now, his own community. And Judy Leaf is a very close friend and teaches at Westchester often, and I know she's going to come and teach here as well. And then we also have quite a number of people within the group of people who are coming, who expressed interest in coming here, who are capable teachers, such as Michelle Laporte here, and I don't know who else, certainly Alan Novick, and others who may step forward and are not here tonight will also be teaching. Michael Rogan, I know will be teaching as well, and perhaps more, I'm hoping. If I haven't mentioned your name, don't be worried. We're accepting volunteers right and left. And we're going to put together a roster of speakers. So the inspiration is both to carry on the spirit and the teachings of Trungpa Rinpoche, and also to expose ourselves to other teachings, both Western and traditional Tibetan. I found over the years that my training with Trungpa Rinpoche prepared me very well for listening to teachers who sometimes speak in a vocabulary that is difficult to understand. So for instance, there are Tibetan teachers who speak in a very traditional style, and you might find it very religious. But when you've had enough exposure to the heart of what these teachings are, you can translate, and it can become very meaningful for you to hear teachings that otherwise might sound foreign more exotic. So I think all of this is in the offing and more, because this is going to be a joint creation, this center, of all of us. And so I'm hoping that people will step forward with ideas and requests and desires, and that we can shape this project together. The Westchester Buddhist Center up in Westchester has been a terrific success, in part because we've had some wonderful patrons up there. And by patrons, I mean not so much people who are giving money, although we've got more than enough because we've never had to pay rent up there. Richard Gere gave us space initially at the Bedford Post Inn. It was a beautiful space. And Annie Fisher now gives space up there. And here we're really very lucky that Nalanda Bodhi has been so generously made this space available to us, and we're going to make a contribution, and they've been very passive about how much they want, and it's really very generous the way they've done it. And we'll be giving them, whatever we can. So, okay, I think that's one thing I wanted to say about this, what we're trying to do here. I thought I would start talking about Trungpa Rinpoche tonight. I have my notes. But in doing the chants, I got a slightly different angle and inspiration. And I wanted to say something about these chants, like home in the northwest of the land of Uddiyana, on a blooming lotus flower, you have attained supreme wondrous siddhi. We're talking about this gentleman here, that statue right there, that's Padmasambhava. That was the 7-line supplication to Padmakara. Padmakara is another name for Padmasambhava. And we ask him to come from Uddiyana. Uddiyana is probably, no one knows exactly where it was, semi-mythical, not really, but probably in now, what is now Afghanistan, in an area called the Swat Valley, which is a very interesting area, to say the least. And he went to Tibet in the 8th century and became kind of the father of Tibetan Buddhism. There were people who had gone before him, many people who came after, but he stood out for bringing Buddhism very powerfully to the Tibetans. And so the Tibetans, in every sect, regard him as kind of foremost among the exponents of Buddhism, and they express their gratitude to him. And what we're doing when we do this 7-line supplication is we're calling him. You see, when he achieved what is called the rainbow body, and that means that he didn't really die, if anyone ever really dies. Yeah, this is part of the Buddhist teachings. And that in some way he is still available to us, as is anybody who's achieved the rainbow body, which is an extreme form of enlightenment. And that we can call him and he will come. That's what this chant is about. And he will come and bless us and help us. So we're asking him to do that. But you have to understand, Buddhism is non-dual. It teaches that what we call the self does not exist. It's just a fiction, a story that we tell often, from time to time, inside what we think is inside our skulls. And we tell this story about I. And it's not only about I, it's about other. So we are firmly, as we come to the path, ensconced in this belief that I exist, and likewise everything else outside me or in relationship to me exists. And I am in a constant problematic relationship with other, in which there are 3 possible relationships. I and other can either get closer to themselves, to each other, get farther away, or maintain the same distance. These 3 relationships are called the 3 poisons. And they're given the names of passion, because when you are passionate about something, you see it as augmenting your existence, supporting your existence, and alleviating or allaying your fear of death, then you want to draw it to you. And that's the poison of passion or desire. And then when you see something that is inimical to you, that's threatening, that threatens your well-being or even your existence, you want to distance yourself from it. You want to get away from it. That's aggression. Push it away or move yourself away. And when the other has neither of those two implications, then you're indifferent to it and you don't care. And that is the third poison. That's called indifference. Or it's usually translated as ignorance, but that's a poor translation for it. And it's the word that in Sanskrit or Tibetan is not the same word that usually translates ignorance. So we tend to, because we are so firmly ensconced in the belief in I and other, the teachings are presented to us in these terms. Because they really, we can read the teachings about non-dualism, but it becomes very theoretical, especially in the beginning. And so much of what we're taught is put in dualistic terms. And we in these chants, we are asking external deities or people to help us. Same thing with the lineage chant. Great Vajradhara, that's a Buddha. Telo, Naro, and Marpa. These are the three founders, you might say, of the Kagyu lineage. Telopa, Naropa, and Marpa. Telo, Naro, and Marpa for short. And then we go down through this lineage tree of the succession. These teachers each pass the teachings on to their students, and that's what's being invoked in the lineage chant. And we're calling on these figures to bless us. But the key to understanding this is to realize that these figures represent aspects of mind or enlightenment or reality that exist within us right now. Right now. And so when we call on them, what we're really doing is we're summoning our own wisdom, our own intelligence, our own heart, our own compassion, our own good cheer and friendship, which is what these figures represent. Our own enlightenment, ultimately. Because Buddhism teaches that all of us are fundamentally enlightened. This is called Buddha nature. All sentient beings have it. And it's not that we're someday going to realize it. It's here now. It's just that we've lost track. We've fallen into kind of a dream. And the dream is the dream of I and other. All the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves and our world as we walk down the street, as we sit and eat our dinner, as we get ready to go to bed at night. All the time, our mind is constantly going churning out stories, very repetitive. That's a telltale right there, how repetitive those stories are. Freud said that repetition is the hallmark of neurosis. He got it right. In the Buddhist teachings, these things are called, in the Tibetan, they're called namdak. And namdak means habitual patterns. They are the repetitive patterns of the stories that each one of us has developed. They are our karma. They enslave us because they guide us and dictate the way in which we move through the world. And really the purpose of the Buddhist path is to wake up from this dreaming. Literally, Buddha means the awakened one. Buddha means awake. The word enlightenment is a Western translation for bodhi, which means awake. And awake from what? Awake from the dreams, the stories that enslave us. And they make us happy and mostly unhappy. It might make you happy for a little bit, but really they make you unhappy. These stories, they're just painful. They're the painful stories of neurosis. So the whole point of the Buddhist path is to awaken from these stories and awaken to what? Awaken to this world as it is unfolding in the present moment. True, there is a past, but really the only way we can access it now is through a story. And that story is a made-up story. It's very partial. It's like if you were to leave this room tonight, as you will, and then tell someone what happened here tonight, you will select a very small number of elements, whether or not you like the talk, how good the chairs were, how were the refreshments after, how did you feel in the room, and you're going to select out of this huge panoply of experience that we're all just bathing in at the moment, with pictures and colors and the lights and people next to you and all that. You're going to select out very small elements and tell a story that is purposed. And the purpose of that story is to make yourself happier, to try and sort of find your pleasure, your well-being, one's well-being. And it's going to be dictated by the habits, the particular styles that you, each one of us, brings to the party, that have been developing over all the years of your life, and which are constantly changing under the impact of new experience. Slowly, sometimes fast. But as you experience new things, those stories can change and morph. Now, the purpose of a teacher, and this is Trungpa Rinpoche, is to help us wake up from these dreams. And a teacher does that in a variety of ways. When the teachings developed in India, they developed over centuries. The Buddha, there are different versions. There's sort of the historical version of how the teaching is developed. You might say the Western historical version, although there are Easterners who subscribe to it or will teach it as well. And then there is the Buddhist version. Now, in the Buddhist version, the teacher, the Buddha himself, gave all the teachings during his lifetime. But it's simply that the world wasn't ready for certain ones of them. And so those ones that the world wasn't ready for got delayed, and they emerged and became prominent at later times in history. In the Western view, the teachings morphed and changed over time. They kind of, the way, if we were to go around into that old joke about how you tell a story and you pass it around and it's different by the time it reaches the end of the chain. Well, that's what happened to Buddhism as well, and it developed over time. As one teacher after the next passed the teachings down, their realization, their awakening, they helped their students achieve the same thing. So the main job of a teacher, you see, is to help their students, and it's done in a different style according to the tradition. Now, Buddhism left India over the centuries and was completely gone from India by about the 11th century, when the Muslims invaded India and just wiped Buddhism off the face of India. But by that time, it had already moved into Southeast Asia, and there was a particular style of Buddhism that moved into Southeast Asia. It had gone to China, and from China into Korea and Japan, and that's called Mahayana Buddhism. And it had also gone to Tibet, and there's some other smaller countries as well, Mongolia. In Tibet, though, they received almost the complete Indian canon. For whatever reason, there were problems, and we don't need to go into them, with the transmission of Buddhism to other countries. With China, there was a huge linguistic problem because of the difference between Chinese and the Indian languages was massive. And that acted as an enormous filter, much less the cultural barriers. But Tibet received almost the complete Indian canon, and they divided it into three sections. What's called the lesser vehicle, the greater vehicle, and the diamond or adamantine vehicle. These are stages. They're a progressive stage on the path. So when a student starts practicing, they are sort of ipso facto at the level of the lesser vehicle, or Trungpa Rinpoche preferred to call it the foundational vehicle. And you're learning the basic teachings, and you're learning to learn how to meditate and how to practice. And then you move up to the Mahayana, which is the greater vehicle, and from there to the adamantine. Each vehicle has its style of teacher. The teacher at the foundational level is a preceptor, an instructor. They are a model of, you might say, of discipline and of learning. And they help us. They're also very generous. At the Mahayana stage of the path, the teacher introduces us to a vision of non-dual reality. And the style of this teacher is that of a friend. There's a Sanskrit word for it which translates spiritual friend. And Trungpa Rinpoche used to say that the relationship between the student and the teacher at this level is eye level. And then at the Vajrayana level, the relationship is extraordinarily intimate and powerful. And the teacher at that level is called the Vajra Master. And it's very fierce, that relationship. But throughout, the purpose of the teacher is to show the student their enlightened nature, their awakened nature, what it's like to wake up from the dreams. If you were to pick up the first book of Trungpa Rinpoche's talks that was ever published in the West, it's called Meditation in Action. It's a collection of talks that he gave in England before he came to the United States. And he always said of that book that he very much responded to his audience, and he felt that the English were so stiff. And so that those talks he felt were a little more stiff. When he got to America, the audiences weren't stiff at all. We were all hippies, and wild. And it was crazy times, and he loosened up a lot. Although in the cities, he tended to shut down because he said that when he got to the cities, there was so much suffering that the people who were coming to hear him, there's so much suffering. And then when people are like that, their minds are not open. They're looking for answers. They're looking for solutions. And that tends to distort the teaching. So he had to be much more careful in the big cities like New York especially, and San Francisco and Los Angeles. And that's why he located himself in the West, in Boulder, Colorado, because he felt that when people came from these cities, and they went through kind of a purification process coming across the plains and across the Rocky Mountains. And by the time they got to Colorado, they were much more open and ready to hear the teachings in an unbiased way. But in Meditation in Action, there's an essay that I always loved, and it's about the relationship between the teacher and the student. And in it, Rinpoche says that the teacher is giving the student a gift, but it's not, because it's something that the student already had. They just weren't aware of it. He said, nonetheless, the student feels that the teacher has shown them something they couldn't see before. And so there's terrific gratitude on the part of the student to the teacher for having received this teaching, this gift, you might say. Even though the teacher is saying, at least to himself, that he didn't give the student anything. He was just showing the student what they already had and were overlooking. But Rinpoche says in that same essay that feeling of gratitude is actually necessary and useful, because gratitude is a great slayer of ego, and it keeps the student from sort of getting too puffed up about what they've discovered. That they now have to be grateful to the teacher. And in my experience also, it makes you very paranoid about the teacher. Because you always feel like the teacher really knows who you really are. You can pretend to others that you're somewhat, a great teacher or exalted, but when you're around your root teacher like Trungpa Rinpoche, I always felt he had X-ray vision, and so did all my other Dharma brothers and sisters, his students. It made you sort of paranoid around him. At the same time, the quality of openness that took place between him and us was profound. In fact, I would say that that is the reason that all of us stayed, because he showed us, it wasn't because of the lectures, which are now published in books. I mean, I could have heard those and gone on. But the quality of the communication between him and all of his students, all of us, was so open. Openness was so key. He was always looking for it. Some students were more capable of it than others. I remember once I was sitting with him, and a woman who was actually a benefactor, she contributed money, came into the room. This was in the 1970s, very early days. And he was just learning the language, you know. And she came in and she was so frightened, you know. And she said, "Oh, Trungpa Rinpoche, you know, I've heard so much about you. It's so nice to meet you. And isn't this lovely weather we're having? And how are you? How is your wife?" And you know, the kind of things that people say when they're nervous and like that. And he just was perfectly lovely to her. And then she left. And she almost like expelled herself from the room. I could see she was so nervous. And when we were alone, he turned to me and he said, "Not a swinger." He had learned this word, swinger. And by that, what he meant was someone who could relax and be open. He was always looking for that. He loved that in people, adored it. Later, when I had the job of showing people in to see him for interviews, he would give interviews. I would go in and then, you know, bring them out, and when a lot of time was up, and afterwards I would go in and he would say something about the person. And when the person was open and the communication was completely flowing, you know, he was so happy. Frankly, I felt that he lived for that. That he, from the time he woke up in the morning to the time he fell asleep at night, all he really loved and lived for was to be with his students, to be with people. It's like he just loved people all together. So at these three levels, Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana, in different styles, the teacher is leading us towards waking up from these dreams. You see, the dreams shut us down. It's like if a person's really dreaming, if they're anxious, you can go up to them and call their name. Sometimes the person won't hear you. We've all experienced that. We've been that, right? So lost in thought that someone calls our name and we don't even notice. Those dreams separate us. They take us away from the world. They make us unavailable. And they immerse us in fictions, these fictions that we tell ourselves, which are painful fictions. They're all about hope and fear, regret for the past, hope for the future, fear for the future. And they're very unpleasant. And they come and they go. And there are times when we feel happier, and there are times when we're utterly immersed and depressed. And they make us tight. And when we are sort of driven by these things, sometimes we meet someone for the first time, and we're so self-conscious we can barely move because we're thinking, it's all full of judgment, good and bad. You know, how am I doing? Am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the wrong thing? You know, what's this person thinking of me? I mean, I don't know about you, but I can walk down the street, pass someone on the sidewalk, have a complete fantasy about them, and 30 feet later realize that I've just had a fight with this person. And they're gone. You know, they've dissolved into the New York, you know, melee. I mean, it's pandemic. So really what the teacher is doing is they're showing you your awake mind, the mind that wakes up. This is really, in one way or another, the main function of the teacher. And it is the point of the Buddhist path to help us awaken to our lives as they unfold in this present moment. I mean, sure, we're the product of our pasts. Our pasts are how we got here. But the past doesn't exist anymore. And the future, it's just an imagining. Now, we all know that in a short period of time, we're going to get up from these seats and walk out the door and go to our homes. That's a fact. That's the future. But when we worry about it, when we plan it, when we strategize it, then we're enslaved to it. There's a text that Trungpa Rinpoche wrote, famous line, or famous to me anyhow. Hope and fear are bandits which have stolen our minds away. So, the teacher, then, this principle, I said he's the Padmasambhava of our time because I feel that he brought Buddhism to the West so powerfully. So much so, I mean, there are wonderful teachers abroad, there have been and there are today and there will be. But frankly, maybe it's my jaundiced view because I knew him so well, but I feel there's none like him. I was married to a woman who was his secretary for a while, for quite a few years, Beverly. She used to call him Mr. Magic. And it wasn't because he performed feats of magic. It was because when you were around him, you were brought into the present moment so powerfully. I felt that when I walked into a room with him, somebody had just turned up the rheostat, that the lights got brighter, figuratively speaking. And Peter, was there for that, and he's nodding, yes. This is the power of the teacher-student relationship. It's not just him, but it's any teacher-student relationship. And in Tibetan Buddhism, perhaps more so than in any other form of Buddhism, the relationship between teacher and student is paramount. The teacher brings this to the student. It's in relationship. It's not theoretical. It can't be learned from books. It's in the friendship, deep friendship, and beyond friendship, that can happen between two human beings, that kind of openness. They say, I was reading a text, there's a practice called Guru Yoga, where you unite with the Guru. And you imagine the Guru sitting in front of you, and you merge with the Guru, sort of figuratively speaking. And the real meaning of Guru Yoga, you see, is that the teacher has shown you the awakened state of mind, or something close to some version of coming into the present, and the value of that, the complete value of that. And so that when you practice Guru Yoga, what you're doing is the same thing we're doing when we do these chants, is that you're rediscovering the awakened state of mind. I was about to say your own, but it doesn't really belong to anybody. It's just here, now. Not the property of anyone. And every time you practice Guru Yoga, uniting with the Guru, that means to rediscover that mind that the teacher showed to you and for which you're grateful. And in this way, in this particular text that I was reading, they say something that's said many times, that the teacher embodies the three jewels. In Buddhism, they're what are called the three jewels. And when you become a Buddhist, if you want to sort of become a Buddhist and subscribe, you don't have to, but if you want to join the club, you take refuge. That's kind of like confirmation for a Christian, or bar mitzvah for a Jew, a bas mitzvah. And you take refuge in the three jewels. And the three jewels are the Buddha, the teacher, the Dharma, which are the teachings, which is what this is coming out of my mouth now, and the Sangha, which is us, the community of fellow practitioners who help each other along the path, and our friends. And Trungpa Rinpoche used to say that the Sangha, you walk alone together. And that way, if somebody falls down, the person next to them doesn't fall down with them because they're not leaning on them. And they can reach down and help them back to their feet. So there's the Buddha, which is the teacher principle, the teachings, and the Sangha. The teacher incorporates all three, embodies all three. That's how precious that relationship is. Now, when Rinpoche arrived here in 1970, it was a very, very different time, as those of you who are old enough to be there remember. And in fact, I was reading Jim Lowry's book. He wrote a book about this time called Taming Untamable Beings. And he starts out by saying, you know, if you can remember the 60s, you weren't there. That's a famous quote. It was, and I just made a few notes about what I felt were the key themes of it, because it was such a different time, and it made Trungpa Rinpoche a different teacher than he would be today. And I'm saying this because a lot of people have a lot of criticisms about him for his drinking, which ultimately killed him, and his sexual affairs with women, which were many. But it was a different time, a totally different culture. I can't imagine what he would be like today. He'd already changed by the time he was getting on towards his death. When I met him, he was about 30 years old, and I'm just going to be frank, he was putting down about a fifth to a quart of Johnny Walker a day. It's pretty intense. And I remember, you know, all of us wished he wouldn't, because we knew it was bad for his health. And so people would constantly say, why do you drink? You know, I never got a straight answer out of him. I frankly felt, I mean, this man was not what we normally call an alcoholic. There was no lying. There was no avoidance. Quite the reverse. He was the most honest, open human being that I've ever known in my life. Frighteningly so, you know. And I think anybody who knew him would say the same thing. And yet, he drank prodigiously. And the best answer I ever got out of him was, one time he said, you know, he was the 11th in his line, just the way the Karmapa is the 17th, that man up there in his line. These are Tulkus, the Dalai Lama is the 14th, and Trungpa Rinpoche was the 11th. And the 10th Trungpa had been a great ascetic. He lived his life in a meditation box. That's a box that doesn't allow you to lie down. You just are sitting, you know, the way Michelle and Carrie are sitting, day and night. And he was vegetarian, and he was, you know, celibate. He had no sex. And Trungpa Rinpoche said, maybe the pendulum swung so far to one degree into that direction in my past life that it had to come all the way over in this one. But the thing was that it was also a great teaching. And I'll tell you a story. Trungpa Rinpoche loved Suzuki Roshi dearly. When Roshi died in 72, I think, Rinpoche said, I've lost my only friend in North America. And I don't think the two of them spent more than 4 or 5 hours together total in a number of visits. But Rinpoche loved him. My friend Henry Schaefer was a student of Roshi's, and then after Roshi died, became a student of Trungpa Rinpoche. And he said that Roshi got wind that his students, you know, it was a very severe environment. They were Soto Zen and Tassajara, for those of you who know Tassajara, and Green Gulch, and the San Francisco Zen Center. And their style was Soto Zen. It was very black and white, severe, ascetic. And Roshi got wind that his students were critical of Trungpa Rinpoche for his drinking and his womanizing. And he called a meeting in the Zendo. And as Henry describes it, Roshi was furious. And he said, Trungpa Rinpoche is a true Buddhist. What he's doing is very dangerous. He's taking on American karma. Now, I understand completely what that means. And what it means is this. These times, you know, this was the time of Vietnam. I protested the war, you know, in Chicago when I was a student. And these were the times of psychedelia. I mean, I and everybody else had dropped acid. And, you know, Ram Dass actually turned me on to Eastern religion, Baba Ram Dass and Richard Alpert. And these were the times of counterculture. We were rejecting the values of our parents and looking for a new way to be. Hence all the communes in Boulder, Colorado, was commune capital of the United States. There were more communes there than you could shake a stick at. And in fact, Jim Lowry's book, Taming Untamable Beings, is about a commune that became students of Trungpa Rinpoche en masse. They were called the Pygmy Farm, and he loved them dearly. But there were other communes that had a very different style, where there was arrogance and aggression and self-righteousness. And people came, and everybody was trying to change themselves so much, according to some kind of idealism. I remember one lecture, a guy standing up, he said it became clear he was vegetarian and a yogi, and he said to Rinpoche, who ate meat and drank, he said, "Your body is your temple. You're defiling your body." The man says to Trungpa Rinpoche. And Rinpoche was sitting on a stage. This was up at a place called Allen's Park. It was up at about 10,000 feet in the Rocky Mountains. And we were in this summertime, and we were in this structure that had a roof, but it didn't have any walls. It just had pillars. It was open to the air, and it had a dirt floor. So we were all sitting on this dirt floor. And Rinpoche was on a slightly raised stage, maybe 3 or 4 feet. And as he sat there, and this guy was talking about how your body's your temple, you're defiling your body, your temple, a dog walked across in front of the stage. And Trungpa Rinpoche leans over in his chair and he starts barking at the dog. And then, in almost a non sequitur, not quite, he was looking down, like this, like that, barking at the dog. And he looks up at this fellow and he says, "The whole world is my body." And you see, the whole point is, he's telling this guy, stop trying to make yourself into something and open yourself to everything. Everything, this whole world. That doesn't mean you stand in front of an oncoming train or you do something that's harmful to yourself. That's stupid. You need your body to navigate. But I don't think Trungpa Rinpoche, I think he was past that when I met him. I remember him telling me at one point when I first met him, he said, "I'm going to die when I'm 37. He didn't. He lived to 47. And then he looked at me and said, "You better get on with it. Hurry up. Wake up." He wanted all of his students to awaken to this life, and to love it. It really is a matter of loving one's life, and not in a corny way, a sentimental way, or a grasping way, but really of being here for all of it, the ugliness as well as the beauty, for all of it as it unfolds, including our deaths and our illnesses and our aging and the loss that will come. And if we aren't here for that, if we aren't willing to be here for that, then it's going to be very painful for all of us, because we're going to lose all kinds of stuff. I've lost my hair a lot more. And so does Tim. And there's a lot more to come, including, when we die, you lose the whole world. So really, to be here for all of it, for all the change, with an open mind, really is what meditation is all about. I can see Priscilla nodding. Yes, it really is. It's our practice. It's to constantly come back out of the dream as it arises, to see it, to let it evaporate, and to come back into this present moment. So I'm just saying that this time that we were in Vietnam, or the war, counterculture, Richard Nixon, psychedelia, rejecting our parents' values. My parents had grown up worrying so much about money, which is ironic because I'm back to that now. And what else? And really, he walked into the middle of this this melange, and started teaching the Dharma. And the first thing he taught us was the teaching of spiritual materialism, that you can use spirituality, which could be yoga, could be macrobiotics, could be vegetarianism, it could be meditation, it could be worshiping God in one of his forms. You can use it to aggrandize and bolster your own ego, and not to do that. And he used to say to us, please don't go on any trips. Don't go on any trips. Please don't go on any trips. He was using the language of the time. We were all talking about tripping. I remember he used to get on an airplane. We put him on an airplane to go somewhere and teach. And as he entered the door, he'd turn around and he would say, have a nice trip. So, what am I leaving out here that I wanted to talk about?
John.
Yes. Oh, sorry, Alan.
Could you pick up the Roshi's comment that from
What he was doing is...
Angels taking on American karma?
Yes.
More explicitly, I think you...
Oh, okay. Yes, I didn't get that clear. Here's the way I heard it. We all came with such preconceptions. I mean, you can't drink that much alcohol and be a holy man, you know? You can't sleep with, your students and be a holy man, be a teacher, a guru. And what he was saying was, there are no rules. There are no rules. That doesn't mean that you go out and commit all kinds of selfish, self-aggrandizing crime. But what he was saying is that the truth, the essence of meditation, is beyond any of those rules. Now, they're useful at a particular stage of the path, those rules, those guidelines, because we're so neurotic. We're liable to go out and hurt ourselves or hurt others. And at the beginning stages, and maybe even the beginning to the middle stages of the path, it's useful to have rules about, not killing things and not stealing. And when we do group meditations for a week, we take the 5 precepts, which are not to commit, not to kill, not to steal, not to lie. That's a good one. Not to have inappropriate sex, and not to whatever that means, and not to consume alcoholic beverages, at least at the time. And we take those vows every morning when we do these retreats. Although, if you plan to break one of those vows during the day, you just simply don't say it. Because if you say it and you break it, then you have to go confess to somebody. This is the discipline, But what he's saying is that the truth, and he was teaching the truth in many ways, this truth of the openness of the present moment, knows no rules, it knows no descriptors. And those kind of things, if you believe in them, they blind you. They will lead you astray. They will turn you into some kind of, if in the case of religiosity, some kind of pious, self-sanctimonious, do-gooding, whatever. And what Roshi was saying is that Chögyam Rinpoche, in presenting such an extreme example of not doing that, was taking a very dangerous path. And of course it was dangerous. It wound up killing him. He died of alcohol cirrhosis in the liver. Although nobody says that, but that's really what it was. And I don't think he cared. I think he just was loving it right up to the end. And it's just who he was. I feel personally, after all of it, that he drank and behaved the way he did, the same way I have brown eyes and you have blue eyes, and I'm a man and you're a woman, and it's just who he was. And meanwhile, he was living a very, to me, as near as I can ever tell about any other human being, enlightened life. Rochelle.
I think one of the reasons also that he drank was to ground himself. Because I saw, once I was in a car with him going to a talk, and he was drinking, and it just seemed like he was like everyone has a certain city, like some people have a city with, let's say, I don't know, fire or air or some kind of element. But his city was, when he used alcohol, it was to ground him, and he became an enlightened city, teaching with that kind of energy. Like American Indians would smoke, a pipe, to pass the pipe around, and they did it for a certain type of environment or certain type of mind. But I think that's one of the reasons also is that he was grounded, and when he taught, his teaching style totally opened up into a different situation. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah.
So basically, I think he did it for us.
You did what?
He did it for us.
Did it for us? Okay. Me, I have no idea why he did it. To me, it was just who he was. All of us, I would sit around and we'd ask him not to, on occasion. Or we'd, ask him, well, it's time to go, let's go to the talk, He just did what he was going to do. I felt that, he was, how do you say this? This is, by the way, there's a name for this behavior. It's in the tradition. It's called Yeshe Chowa in Tibetan, which translates usually as crazy wisdom. And what it means is that it's wisdom that sees so accurately what needs to be done in the present moment to help sentient beings that it doesn't obey any of the standard rules or precepts of behavior. Instead, it is utterly accurate and on the spot for the benefit of of the students and sentient beings. And it can be crazy at times. It can seem crazy. It can seem disruptive or counter to ordinary behavior. Finally, I think, Trungpa Rinpoche was raised kind of like, he's sort of the equivalent of a Monsignor in the Catholic Church. He was a very high Lama. And he received extensive training in Tibet and had some really marvelous teachers. His root guru was a very famous teacher, Chogyam Trungpa, who was an incarnation of one of the most important teachers of the late 19th century, Chogyam Trungpa the Great, who, when he died or passed on, he had 5 incarnations, of which Trungpa Rinpoche's teacher was one. Usually there's only one incarnation. The Chogyam Trungpa had 5, and it's supposed to be a signal of his attainment. And when he came to this country, he came to the West. He received first of all, he was told to leave Tibet by his teachers that he needed to leave, and he did. And he took a party up, most of whom died as they crossed the Himalayas because they were killed by the Chinese or they died under extreme conditions. And a very small number of them survived and made it into India. And you can read all about this in Born in Tibet. And then he received a fellowship, a grant, to go to England and study, and he went and studied at Oxford. And then he and another fellow Lama started a meditation center in Scotland called Samye Ling. And in 1968, the Queen of Bhutan invited Trungpa Rinpoche to come and do a retreat in Bhutan at a famous cave where this fellow, Padmasambhava, had meditated before he went to Tibet. It's called Tag Tsang. It's quite famous because it's on the side of a cliff with a several thousand-foot drop. And in fact, the drop is so severe, Trungpa Rinpoche liked to tell about the toilet there, which had the nickname the Long Drop. And I've never been there, but I've quite a few friends who have. Maybe people in this room. Anybody? Alan has. That's right. Just came.
Alan just came from there.
Right. Right. Did you go up by donkey and then walk?
We went up by horse. Some of us went up by horse halfway and then walked.
Horse halfway. Yeah, I've heard you can't go up the whole way on horse. It's really dangerous.
Right.
Yeah. The way up. Anyhow, he did a retreat there and had what many of the students guessed, because he never would say it, was an enlightenment experience or a profound breakthrough. And when he came back to Scotland, he was still in robes, and he had an automobile accident that affected him for the rest of his life. Students like to tell the great irony that he drove, or a great appropriateness that he blacked out behind the wheel of a car and drove it into a joke shop, which he felt was so utterly appropriate. In any event, he disrobed. He took off his robes. And by the time he arrived here, he was wearing ordinary Western clothes. This was quite a shock for the person with whom he'd started Samueling and for others of his students, who felt that he was abandoning his discipline and his path and his role. But quite the reverse. He was embracing it all the more fully. He was stepping out into the world. He was giving up the protection that the robes afford. When you see somebody in robes, you automatically feel this person's holy. And Trungpa Rinpoche was wearing ordinary clothes. I remember we took a trip to Buffalo early on, and we were in an airport, and we had a meal, and everybody kind of wandered off. They were doing different things. And at some point, I realized that I didn't know where Trungpa Rinpoche was. And I started searching the airport, and I finally found him in a bar, having a drink, deep in conversation with a person sitting to his right, to whom he'd introduced himself as David Mukpo. Mukpo was his family name. David was the name of his deceased father-in-law. And so that was his name on his passport. And it was totally credible, that he could be David Mukpo. So you see, he'd really stripped away that protection of the role. In fact, now when you call somebody Rinpoche, people generally know what that is. It's a title. It means jewel or precious one. For us, we had never met any other Tibetans. Rinpoche wasn't a title, it was his name. We just called him Rinpoche the way, I call you Carrie or you Rochelle. And so I felt that he had stripped down, he loved America, he loved his students, he loved the whole hippie movement, although he could be critical as well. And really what he was teaching was this extraordinary openness. He finally, I'll say this, that the teacher-student relationship is so important. And he taught that the key element in the teacher-student relationship is open communication. And that in finding a teacher-student relationship, that's what each one of us, anybody, should be looking for. It's not credentials. It's not some aura of holiness. It's the ability to communicate mind to mind, with the student, to be open. I actually wrote an essay about this years ago for the Shambhala Sun. And I described how he gave me instruction on how to teach. Not that I'm holding myself out anyway to be able to do what he did. But here's what he told me. We all think that to be a meditation teacher, you have to learn the techniques so that you can then teach them to the student. Teach them how to watch their breath, and sit properly and do whatever the techniques may be. And there are a lot of different techniques, a number of them. And that is part of what it means to be a meditation teacher. But here's what he told me. He said the key to being a meditation teacher is to be able to open your mind to the student. He said, and what he meant by open, we've all met people who are very open to us. And it warms us, it warms our hearts, doesn't it? And it allows you to relax and feel seen and appreciated. And what he said is this. He said the teacher opens to the student. And this encourages the student to, in turn, open to the teacher. And then the teacher can open a little more to the student, which then encourages the student to open more to the teacher. And this goes back and forth. He called this a dance. He called it diplomacy. And he called it making love. Really, it's the essence of love. And he said, the teacher has to be watchful, and watch. You see what the student is capable of. Some people are capable of opening enormously, maybe even all the way, whatever that means. And I don't know what that means. And he said, but some students can. And he said, for them, the teacher doesn't push too far. Because if the teacher opens further than the student is ready to accept, then the teacher becomes a demon and will frighten the student away. And that defeats the purpose of the whole exercise or the whole relationship. So the purpose really is to have this open, it's the deepest kind of friendship, maybe even beyond friendship. So I think when I say Chögyam Rinpoche was the Padmasambhava of his time, brought Buddhism to the West, what he brought was the heart of Buddhism. And he was so conscious of that. He told us all, he said, I am giving you the essence of it. He said, and he wouldn't teach Tantra for the first, 3 or 4 years of Vajrayana, because it was so exotic. And he knew that we all wanted this kind of exoticism. I remember in another instance, he gave a seminar called Mandala. And everybody's going, ooh, mandala. Mandala is this schematic for the cosmos and very sort of mystical. And so we went to this seminar, and I remember him teaching, he said, the whole point is to become completely ordinary. He said, he said the Buddha was completely ordinary. He was a completely ordinary human being. He said, now you will say, wasn't that extraordinary? He said, and in doing that, you become subhumans. He said to us, you become subhuman because you want to be extraordinary. The point is to become a completely ordinary human being, a citizen of this world. And later in that seminar, when he was supposed to be giving the talk on Mandala, I don't know if Jim talks about this in that book. He was sitting on this very low stage, and there are all these hippies. In fact, the picture on the cover of that book, I'm pretty sure was from that seminar. It was given at a place called the Wesley Foundation. It was a church that was in an A-frame in Boulder. And if you look at the cover of that book, Taming Untamable Beings, you will see a collection of ragtag hippies. Everybody with long hair and everybody young, mostly. There were some older people who were probably then younger than I am now. And there was a woman sitting in the front row with a baby. And the baby was crying. And Rinpoche hadn't started talking yet. And he asked her, he's emotional, he said, give me the baby. So she did. She put the baby in his arms. And he bent over like this. And when he came up, tears pouring down his face. And he said to us, you're all like this baby. You're crying, for relief. And I felt that what he was teaching us, these teachings are about how to become a real adult, ordinary citizen of this world. A good citizen. I got teary. So I think I've gone on quite a long time. So we could have a discussion if you like.
Do you have another mic? Do you have a mic?
We don't have another mic. I'm sorry, we didn't discover it. We'll just have to talk.
So maybe you can repeat the question.
We pass this one?
No, you can repeat the
I'll
question.
repeat the questions because this is on record, I'm afraid.
Well, you mentioned that if the teacher opens too much when the student isn't ready, he becomes demonic.
Or frightening, let's say.
All right. So that's a form of perceiving the teacher that cuts off any access.
Cuts off access, yeah.
And then there's the demonic form of, like Dorje Trollo, that Padmasambhava took. The wrathful, the deity.
Mm-hmm.
It's wrathful, which is not the same as demonic.
Well, it can be perceived as demonic.
Right.
So, could you say something about that as a teacher?
Sure.
As a manifestation of a teacher.
Sure. What Alan's referring to is that there are basically two kinds of representations of enlightenment, peaceful and wrathful. So the Buddha obviously is peaceful. If you look up on the wall, there is, I assume that's Tara, and she's a peaceful aspect of enlightenment. Actually, she represents compassion. And sometimes, though, there are wrathful aspects of enlightenment. You see them and they look demonic. They have fangs and multiple arms, and they're bulging eyes, third eyes, and they're really like scary. Wouldn't want to meet one of those guys in a subway. And, although actually I think they're down there. And the idea you see is that enlightened energy takes these two sort of styles in order to wake us up. Peaceful and wrathful. The wrathful style is kind of like, as a friend of mine once said, mother's standing on a street corner or a curb with her toddler, and the child steps out into traffic, starting to move out into the street, and she goes, "Get back!" and grabs him. That's the wrathful energy, you see? And there's wrathful energy that's necessary to wake us up at times. And that's what that's depicting. So Padmasambhava, this figure on the shrine, what you're seeing here, he's in he had actually 8 aspects, different manifestations that he took in order to teach sentient beings, teach students. And the one that Alan was referring to is Dorje Trollo, means adamantine or indestructible, wrathful one. Trollo means wrathful one. And he's pretty scary in that, looking at that aspect. But it's energy that is meant to wake us up. At times it has to be scary, it has to be wrathful, but it's still compassionate, because the purpose of it is to awaken us, not to scare us. Waken us from the dream. Sometimes it takes something pretty fierce to wake us up. And we're really embedded in a dream. Yeah. Thank you for that question.
Do you think that
That was a plant. Yes, Priscilla.
Do you think that by teaching Vajrayana and Tantra to students, that many students weren't ready for that their minds couldn't really hold it, and so it became abused for some people?
I think there was some abuse. Yeah.
Can you repeat the question?
But I don't think it was pandemic. Oh, the question was...
Do you think it had to do with
The question was...
the Tantra energy? Tantra, Vajrayana?
Tantra...
It was very quick. I mean, he taught so much in his short amount of time.
But he didn't start teaching the Vajrayana. You see, the Vajrayana is supposed to be the fast path. It's no different at its core than the Mahayana. It's all about clear seeing on the one hand and compassion on the other. These two go together. They are two sides of the same coin. If one sees awake, beyond dream, automatically one resonates with the world. Your heart opens. You're an empath. You vibrate in tune. What keeps us from doing that is when we're lost in our dreams of good and bad and judgment, right? So the Vajrayana is really all about skillful means. It shares the same view as the Mahayana, but it's about more powerful techniques to help us clear, get free of these dreams of good and bad, hope and fear. And these techniques can be abused. They have to do with using alcohol, maybe, for instance. At some stage of the path, a more advanced stage, there are sexual practices, sexual yogas. And these things can be, are subject to abuse. Now, Trungpa Rinpoche we never learned sexual practices, but we did learn visualization practices and other things that could lead to some kind of false belief and maybe abuse. I'm not quite sure what. Well, the drinking practices. There were people who we see, there's a practice called feast, where we get together and we practice Vajrayana practices together and one consumes alcohol. And there were people who abused that. Not so much at the feast. I think there were more people who were looking at Trungpa Rinpoche and it was kind of monkey see, monkey do.
Smoking also.
Exactly.
Heavy smoking also.
Yeah.
Wait, what?
Heavy smoking also.
Heavy smoking was, I was a heavy smoker. It was just,
Well, I mean,
probably it.
well, seeing him do it kind of gave us imprimatur in a misguided way.
Yes.
Because people do a lot of.
Yeah, so there was a lot of that. And he always told us not to do that.
Also kind of a mind, rather than the action, not maybe abuse isn't the right word, where the mind couldn't really understand the Vajrayana and the Tantra, and it switched. I mean, a lot of people just didn't get it, and they did something.
You think, Priscilla thinks that a lot of people just
That's
didn't
what I
get
was
it.
wondering, if you think that, the teachings did, touch
I don't know.
things in some people's minds where they couldn't really.
Well,
Michelle. Yeah.
I think one way of looking at it is kind of historically with Trungpa Rinpoche, in that he came from England. He came from England and Scotland, Sami Ling, Oxford and Sami Ling. And actually that happened a lot in England, that there are people to this day who were damaged because they learned tantric practices right off the bat without any kind of shamatha, vipassana, step-by-step taming of the mind and taming of the environment. And so in this way, actually a lot of teachers who came from Asia learned that Western mind is differently oriented, and that it needs a certain amount of groundedness in order to accept Vajrayana teachings with the right understanding. So partly as a result of that, and partly because of his own deep intuition, he locked down the practices. He, in a way that is actually really out of step with today. I think if he was here today and he saw that all of these very secret Vajrayana teachings are published and available on Amazon, and people are teaching them left and right, and they're on YouTube, and all of that with no sort of course of study as he presented it, in a very kind of a regimented way, but also a very protected way, so that people had to get to a certain point before they were allowed to proceed to the next stage and the next stage. And this was maybe more easily done in a time without the internet. But in any case, I think partly as a result of what the great teachers, including Trungpa Rinpoche, saw, he was very protective and very careful, and made sure to cultivate Western mind in such a way that it could accept the tantric teachings for what they are.
I agree completely. Thank you. That was well said. I hope the mics picked it up. He was very slow to introduce the Vajrayana. And really, we spent a lot of years, the first 3, 4, 5 years, doing shamatha and vipassana meditation and listening to Hinayana and Mahayana teachings from him, precisely because he felt that we were looking for something exotic, and that he said himself over and over again, I'm going to give you the core, the essence of the teachings first, and when you understand that, then you can go to these more exotic practices, because you will understand that what they're about. Because what they're about, all of them, the most exotic and bizarre or whatever of them, are always about coming back to this present moment, of waking up from the dreams that inhabit our minds to this life as it unfolds now. That's the core of Buddhism. And it's learning to appreciate that. And then there's the teaching that when one does that, when one begins to live in this world, stripped of these dreams of good and bad and happy and all that, that then one begins to see this world as being sacred in its own right, for no reason at all. That what is arising in the present moment is worth being here for, fundamentally, intrinsically. And this is called sacred world. And this is the real meaning of the Vajrayana. And in fact, you can't see these deities, because that's where these deities lie. They are here now in sacred world, in the world that seen as being of intrinsic value for its own right. Then deity arises. Then the world is seen as being holy. And that's where the Vajrayana lives. And so he was very chary, very slow to introduce these practices for fear that they would be perverted and seen as sort of exotic forms of whatever.
I appreciated your using the word indifference rather than ignorance early on when you spoke about the 3 poisons.
Mm-hmm.
I rarely come across that usage, and it seems to be a more direct and powerful way of describing our being cut off from the world, as opposed to how you describe Trungpa Rinpoche's delight in being with other people, delight in everything that was around him. And even now, speaking about sacred world, how the world can appear to us when we drop the indifference, when we wake up from that sense of ho-hum. What's the big deal? It's just another ordinary day and an ordinary life, and how tedious it all is, and how that whole thing can just completely turn around when the indifference evaporates.
Thank you. That's beautiful. Yeah, there's actually, what Alan is getting at is there's a third principle. There's what's called the ability to see clearly beyond dream, the ability to resonate, which is compassion, to be here with your heart open and resonating. And the third capability, which is actually even more advanced, which is what Alan's talking about, is what's called skillful means. And that means that when you're open and you have no personal agenda of your own, you can respond accurately and helpfully to whatever comes in front of your path. And it's ultimate responsiveness. Yeah. And that's called skillful means, upaya in Sanskrit. And that's the sort of the last thing that a person develops on their way to Buddhahood. First there's clear seeing, then compassion develops, and then finally this skillful means, which really means that you're just here, you're available and responsive. And I felt that he was an exemplar of that, and an example to all of us. The last thing I want to give it, I feel personally these days, I feel his most important teaching for me was his exhortation to all of his students to cheer up. He constantly told us to cheer up. And I remember him sitting in his chair and saying, please cheer up. At the time I thought, well, that's a funny thing to ask us to do. It doesn't seem all that profound. But I sort of feel like it encompasses everything else we've been talking about. That when you cheer up, you're actually here and available. So perhaps we should end at this point. What do you think? And we have some refreshments, and be nice to have a chat for those of you who can stay. We like to end with a chant in Buddhism, because this is all about not being selfish, but being quite unselfish. That's what allows us to come into the present moment. We like to chant a thing called the dedication of merit, where we give away all the benefit that we've gotten from this practice that we've done tonight, and become egoless. So on the last page of this, do you have a chant book? Would you like it? Is the dedication of merit.
This is my favorite part.
You like that? That's great. Maybe it's the most important part.
I think it is.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll do this chant, the dedication of merit, together.
Just a second.
Just a second? Okay.
It's a different dedication.
Okay. Oops, we've got an extra verse in here. I forgot Derek put this in. This middle verse isn't usually there. We'll do it. By this merit may all attain omniscience, may defeat the enemy of wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara may I free all beings. May the Buddha's teachings spread and flourish. May all beings have happiness and joy. May the Dharma be practiced continuously day and night. May the benefit of self and others be spontaneously accomplished. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great East, may the lotus garden of the Rigden's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, everybody.